Heading into Season of the Plunder, Update 6.2.0 brought some pretty substantial sandbox changes. Among them was a buff to an exotic weapon that has been memed on since its release over 4 years ago. The Wishender is a Forsaken exotic known for its ability to highlight enemy targets through walls, with a slow-firing, high-damage archetype. With that said, this weapon's damage has never warranted its extremely long draw time, with the exception of the crazy 16 times damage bug during the Season of Dawn. Though it's seen minimal usage over the last 4 years, today we'll be covering its major buff in Season of the Plunder and why I think this weapon is the most slept on exotic in all of Destiny 2. I'm Above, and if you enjoyed today's video, a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. But before we dive any deeper, I want to take a moment to thank Outplayed for sponsoring today's video. Outplayed is free recording software that can record in the output quality of your choosing and has the ability to integrate with popular supported titles like Apex Legends, Valorant, and Overwatch 2, where it can highlight your kills, assists, and even funny deaths that can be edited and shared to social media all in one place. It's super easy to use, and you can download it now using my link in the description below. Thank you again to Outplayed for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get back to the video. For newer players who may not own Wishender just yet, this exotic quest has been updated from its original form and can now be acquired from the quest archive next to the postmaster in the tower. Wishender's quest can be found within the exotics and legacy tab of the archive, and once you've picked this quest up, you'll progress through several steps that ultimately lead you into the Shattered Throne, where you'll be able to acquire this beastly weapon. Wishender received a laundry list of buffs in Update 6.2.0, so let's go over them. First up, we have the addition of its intrinsic anti-barrier capabilities. Champions are more prominent than ever in Destiny, and there are just 4 primary weapons in the entire game that have the ability to stun them, those being Wishender, Le Monarch, Devil's Ruin, and Malfeasance. This immediately gives Wishender a huge value surge in endgame content like Grandmaster Nightballs, raids, dungeons, and solo lost sectors. When you have a primary weapon that can stun champions, it opens up your loadout flexibility immensely. Instead of dedicating your special weapon to stunning champions, you can spec into ad clear and speed up any activity that you're doing. Now, some will argue that double special is a viable strategy with Arbalest, and that's definitely true, but unless you're an endgame sweat, double special is definitely not for everyone. It's incredibly strong, but if you're not managing your ammo properly, it can hurt you more than it can help, which is why strong primary weapons are so valuable. Next up, Bungie increased the number of hits that Wishender does against PvE targets from 2 to 3. Its exotic perk, Broadhead, pierces targets and does damage on both the initial impact and exit of each arrow, and can overpenetrate targets to kill multiple enemies with a single shot. Prior to the buff, the arrow could only tick an enemy 2 times, but now it hits a 3rd time, which has significantly improved its base damage. As you can see in this Grandmaster Nightfall, Wishender can one-shot body all red bar enemies at 25 under power, which means it's actually super forgiving if you happen to miss a crit, and the fact that it can overpenetrate targets actually comes in handy much more often than you'd think. As if that wasn't enough, they buffed Wishender's damage by an additional 10% against champions, majors, and mini-bosses. So it's not only insane against red bar enemies, it's also going to do much more work against priority targets as well. This may not seem like much, but when you combine this with the previous tick damage buff, this thing chunks priority targets. As you can see in the footage rolling in the background, this thing one-shots barrier champions just like Arbalest does. The fact that a primary weapon can do this is actually pretty nutty and means you aren't really giving up all that much to run Wishender instead. Lastly, they slightly decreased Wishender's draw time, though I will admit this buff is not very noticeable. We'll take what we can get. Now, you're probably thinking, why would I ever use Wishender when Arbalest exists? And I get that argument to an extent because Arbalest is obviously a god tier weapon at the moment, but Destiny is a game of variety and extensive build options. Just because because Arbalest is good doesn't mean Wishender can't be a serious endgame contender as well. Let's evaluate some pros and cons of each gun, starting with Arbalest. This weapon can single-handedly counter modifiers like match game, one-taps barrier champions, and provides disruption break to itself for a 50% damage buff. It also shares finders and scavs with heavy linear fusion rifles for pretty solid ammo economy, but it does have a couple drawbacks. First, when running Arbalest, your special weapon and exotic slot are dedicated to stunning champions, instead of running something that can help in the ad clear department. This can not only slow down your runs, you're also reliant on special ammo bricks to break barriers, and though this usually isn't an issue, it can happen. Second, I find that Arbalest really narrows the loadouts that you can use while you're running it. Since it's a special weapon, you use Arby to break barriers and kill majors, a primary weapon in your secondary slot to stun other types of champions, and either a linear or rocket in the heavy slot to do DPS. With Wishender, I feel like you get so much more variety. First, it can one-tap barrier champions just like Arbalest does, but since it's an exotic primary weapon, it not only has unlimited ammo, it can also generate heavy ammo bricks like crazy. Second, having an exotic primary that stuns champions opens up so much loadout variety. You can use something like Forbearance in the secondary slot to clear ads, and any heavy of your choosing for DPS. Third, the Queen's Wrath perk that grants you True Sight can actually be a lifesaver in endgame content. With lethal teleporting enemies like wyverns and overloads in the game, being able to track their position without being in their line of sight is incredibly useful for both team and solo play. And last but not least, using an exotic primary weapon also builds super energy extremely quickly, and you can farm your super off of champions faster than any other weapon type in the game. All of this combines for a weapon that gives you so much utility in endgame content that I've actually started to prefer Wishender over Arbalest in most activities. Now, you don't have the ability to break every shield type with Wishender like you do with Arbalest, but in that department, it's actually not that bad either. It can chunk shields a decent amount as well. But with that said, it's not going to be on the level of breaking every shield affinity like Arbalest is, so it does take a step back in that department. Wishender's buff has definitely added a wrinkle to a rather stale meta. I'm honestly so happy to have another viable barrier exotic outside of just Arbalest, and if you haven't tried it already, I think it will seriously surprise you. Anyways guys, that's gonna do it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. I also stream live on Twitch over at twitch.tv/above, so feel free to swing on by to talk some Destiny. That's it from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.